Hi, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk About Skills, baby. I'm your host, Kelly Bailey. I'm joined here by our guest, Tony. And Tony, I just realized that I want to say Tsai, but am I butchering your last name? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's good. Yeah, Tsai. Exactly.
Oh, perfect. I'm glad I got it right. I know it's been a little while since we chatted last and going by what I thought. But let me give a little intro to Tony so that everyone knows his background. So Tony is a teacher who works to bring greater meaning and purpose into higher education. He is currently working at the University of Utah's School of Medicine as the Director of Leadership and Development. His background in leadership and development began while serving as an officer in the U.S. Army, and he also has extensive experience in career development, which started when he ran and when we met at the Career Center at the School of Business at the University of Michigan. If you guys want to follow Tony, by the way, he is available on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at antoniustsai.com. And just so for a spelling, that is ANTONIUSTSAI. So Tony, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope I did that justice.
Great. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. And of course, when I say here, I mean in my bedroom, but it's COVID times, right?
Of course.
So
Where are you joining us from anyway, Tony?
No, I have a nice home office now. And so a lot of us have like these alternative workplaces that we've staked out. And so I was able to create one for myself here. So yeah.
That's really nice. Well, I like the background there too. So I wanted to start off a little bit, maybe more on the personal level. And if you could just give us a little bit of a story on your personal journey, would love to hear that.
Yeah. I've had a pretty unconventional career where I had to, quote unquote, reinvent myself quite often. And so this idea of skills is actually very, very important. I started off in the military. And then when you get out of the military, I mean, I was a platoon leader, and so I knew how to do tanks. But of course, out in the real world, tanks, the tank skill is not in high demand. And so, and so then you had to transfer. Sorry, my microphone fell off. Okay.
But no worries.
So what is a transferable skill? And it was about leadership development. And so went to business school, learned finance, and then as well as organizational development. Worked for a little bit in corporate finance, decided that actually quite liked teaching more. And so I eventually left my corporate finance job and went into work in higher ed, first at University now at the University of Utah.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that with us. So, in talking a little bit about skills, we're just keeping it here on a personal level for a minute. If you could put which skills are the skills that you think made you successful? Could you answer that?
Yeah, I think they always call it like these soft skills, but now I think a lot of people are no longer really content to call them soft skills anymore. They're starting to call them essential skills. Right. And so I think everybody, there's going to be essentially two sets of skills. There's going to be technical skills. And so you are going to need to learn some technical skills. And except I think what we're seeing is now that the technical skills must be refreshed every once in a while, but you still need a certain set of technical skills. And then there's another set of skills that's more with managing yourself and managing your relationships. And those type of skills allow you to be more adaptive because once you talk to more and more people, you get to see, oh, this is how the world is changing. This is what people need. And as you sort of see that, you can kind of say, okay, well, what is the overlap between what other people seem to need and what I'd be happy to provide. And then that allows you to essentially orient yourself towards developing more technical skills that you need. Of course, now at this point, I'm in administration and teaching. And so, and there is still some technical skills. Like I still have to figure out how to do Zoom, for example.
Was
but
that a new skill you needed to
it
learn?
is. I mean, I'm much better at it. I still have a lot to learn about it, but that's
Sure.
something that's like, oh, I have to. Originally, I did a lot of speaking in person, and so I was like,
Hmm.
oh, well, that was a skill that I did, but now it's
Yeah.
like, okay, I have to change. So now I have to figure
Yeah.
out how to teach online, and
So
teach.
it's just about pivoting. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's all about like, okay, there's some people, and I have to figure out how to provide value to them, and then that kind of guides me in
Hmm.
terms of the skills I need.
Yeah. And you, like, I just was thinking of this because I'm looking at you with the microphone, and you had just mentioned to me before we started that you're like, well, I got this microphone because I'm, teaching people online and recording these courses. I want to make sure that they can hear me. So I agree. There's so many new skills, especially during this time, that we're picking up. But I like the idea of that there's sort of that foundation core skills. And then there are other ones that you're constantly renewing yourself on. I know, in terms of like jobs always changing, obviously that's going to be very important. So for you, did you feel like your skills came from formal education? Did you feel like these were things you were learning on your own, like a mix? What do you think is kind of the best way in terms of picking up skills?
Yeah, I think working in higher ed, I think higher ed is going to be under a lot of pressure in the future, and part of it is because, I mean, I don't mean to be too hard on higher ed because there's a lot of well-meaning people, but the question is like, what
Mm-hmm.
does higher ed prepare you to do exactly? You know,
Mm-hmm.
what if you take a look at a lot of the classes that are offered, what does that actually provide you to do, allow you to do? Does it teach you
Mm-hmm.
really core hard skills, or does it? And a lot of times it doesn't. And so what happens is I still believe like, yes, between going to school and not going to school, yes, go to school. But I do
Mm-hmm.
also feel that it is no longer the responsibility. Like you can't just say, well, the university is going to teach me everything I need to know. I just need to get a degree and then boom, I get a job. It's like, that's not the case as much anymore. And so even as you're
Mm-hmm.
going through school, you'll have to think about, I would just say you are still responsible for your skill set, and don't
Yeah.
expect that really somebody else is going to spoon feed skills to you. That there are certain things that you're going to want to learn, and the further along you get in your education, what's nice about it is that you can choose the things that you want, because it's no longer like you're in third grade and they make you do stuff. Once
Sure.
you're like your mid-20s, you kind of get to choose the type of skills that you want to develop. So that's, to me,
Right.
pretty exciting.
So having the person really like take the reins, make their own choices and figure out what they want to build over time. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So the reason that I really wanted to have you on the podcast is because of this article that you wrote that I read and shared on LinkedIn, which I absolutely loved. It's called The Most Important Career Advice. And you discussed something that you called the MD plus. And I really loved this concept, and I'll give like a little brief, but then I'd love for you to dive in a little further on it, which is essentially that if I go to medical school and I get a standard medical degree, I'm just like every other person that has a medical degree. And what is my plus? And the reason I love that so much, and I think I mentioned this to you in kind of the back and forth comments that we were sharing, was that I have a sister who is currently a freshman at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and she wants to be an anesthesiologist. But of course, everything that happened and internships and all the things that are going on this summer, she is struggling at what to do. And so when I read that article, I shared it with her, and she was just like, man, I sent her an opportunity that was totally out of the field of medicine and what she had planned on doing this summer. And I was like, you know what, though? This might be a really good idea. So tell us a little bit more about MD plus and what you mean about the plus.
Yeah. Um, I get, and so I get to talk to a lot of students. It's a really great privilege, and I get to be inspired by a lot of students who do very unique things with their career. And in the article, one of the people I mentioned was a person who um, was studied architecture before became a surgeon, and he, when I was with him in the training, he came up to me and says, you know what, I kind of really like architecture. What should I do? Because everybody else is telling me to skip that up because you're a surgeon
Yeah.
now. And And I said, well, if you gave that up, you're kind of giving up a certain unique part of you. That I believe that if you stick with it, obviously you still have to go through training and you have to get through done, or, do it properly and so forth. But
Hmm.
if you keep that part of you, which is very interested in design and architecture, um, you will find that later on there will be an opportunity for you to merge the two of them. And then as you
Hmm.
merge the two things, it will make you different from other people. And then therefore, then you're just not just another surgeon. You're kind of the surgeon that knows how to design buildings. And so in his case, he ended up, he's still in residency, but
Hmm.
he's a chief medical officer for a major architecture firm. And so
Wow.
I know. And it's like, this is an opportunity. And so it's one of those things, but not an easy path, because
No.
one, you do have to do a little bit more work. Um,
Hmm.
and other people are going to discourage you in the beginning. And so there's a
Hmm.
little bit of and so what I wanted to make a distinguishing factor is, like, I didn't tell him to quit his job as a surgeon. I was like, I'm not saying quit your
Right.
job. And what happens is, like, if you can figure out a way to combine two different fields, things that you're really interested in, you'll find that there's going to be interesting opportunities for you.
Yeah. Now, would you say that if someone was going to approach kind of adding to their, whatever it is, right, they're at figuring out what their plus is, do you think that always has to be like a formal schooling, or do you think that they can figure that out in other ways?
Yeah, I mean, I have another colleague, and she really likes kind of theology, and she's also a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, well, she does not train in theology or anything like that, but she is able to have a certain type of conversation with patients that I would say the average doctor doesn't, because
Right.
medical training is fairly secular. And so, but a lot of the patients are not necessarily secular. And so
Mm-hmm.
in a way, she's able to bring that extra part to patient care, because she's really interested in the aspect of being able to talk to patients about their beliefs. And so that's another part where, if you once you kind of integrate that part, I think you kind of make that profession yours. It's kind of, you
Yeah.
practice it in your own way, and I think that makes it fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. And I can imagine too, like in your practice, if you are a doctor with sort of this like specialty or this way that you care for your patients or communicate with your patients, that helps you stand out too. Like you will attract a certain type of clientele that really wants to work with you because they really appreciate that addition that you're bringing to what you're offering.
Yeah, I know. I talked to a lot of people, like right now, because I'm in a medical school, I talk to a lot of doctors, but in the past I've also worked with business school students. But right now, in talking to some of the doctors, and I asked them, like, what do you want to do? It's like, I want to be a good doctor. And I said, well, I want to tell them, like, that's not really quite definitive enough, because what does that mean exactly?
Right.
And so I sort of say, like, if you were to write a memoir about your career, like, and what was it that you brought, you know to the profession, and what is it from you that you brought uniquely, that was like you, what would
Mm-hmm.
that be? And so I do think that, right now, of course, like, the counter to things, like, people may think, I just want a job. The thing is, it's like,
Yeah.
actually, yeah, I know you do want a job, but you actually make yourself much more hireable once you take the time to kind of go in both avenues. You're developing your technical skills and sort of that foundational, but you're also developing your own kind of niche skill. And then once
Mm-hmm.
you develop the two of them, that does actually make you much more um, employable.
Completely. Well, I feel like that concept right there that you're talking about, and just the way you most likely talk to a lot of your students, I know you shared with me, let's see, what you called, like, oh, you created that career journey diagram a couple of years ago. And I kind of wanted to delve into that a bit more, because I loved not only the way that you approached that, but also I'm just like so interested in how you might have conversations with students around this, because of course, as I said earlier, just because we say the word student doesn't mean that like everyone is a student, right? We're all like lifelong learners in this particular sense. Like we're always adding a plus every time we read a book, or every time we learn how to do something new, like Zoom, or create that course online, or for me, a podcast, right? So when you think of that diagram, like kind of help us visualize this diagram. And, so I'd love to hear a little bit about some of these conversations you might have with students around this particular approach that I think is really fascinating.
Yeah. So I've been talking to a lot of people, almost just even from people who are applying to college to all the way to people who are nearing retirement. And so I talked to the whole gamut of people. And then if you talk to enough of them, you get a sense of like what the stages are. And so I kind of broke it down into 4 stages. And because I'm in Utah, I used the mountain, like climbing a mountain, where at the bottom there's more people, but as you go up and up, it's become more lonely to some degree because it's such a hard journey, right?
Right.
And so there's these 4 stages. And the first stage is about the ability to manage yourself. And I do tell people that, look, people have aspirations for leadership and I say, you know what, that's fine, but you first have to be able to set your alarm clock and wake up and go to work. And you actually have to exceed the expectations of your current role in order to move on. Like you can't actually manage people or have great responsibility if you can't manage yourself. And so like the first thing is kind of very fundamental, which is like you actually have to have some discipline. Again, you have to have skills. And so in a way you have to practice something well. Like, and so before you practice something well, don't think about other things. Figure out something that you're going to practice well. And then over time, as you practice things well, you're going to find that you can help other people. And then so the second stage is about developing relationships. And because at a certain skill level, you're going to be able to be a master and be a teacher. And so you're going to have greater influence only because you went beyond managing yourself. And so then what happens is you begin to do the work of managing others. Then there's this third stage, which is about managing change, which is that later on at a certain stage, you're going to practice it to such a degree that you will actually influence the industry itself, that you will actually you're not just like taking somebody else's rules and applying them and, giving directions to people, but you will actually be a thought leader within this. Of course, that's not common because of the fact that it's all about how much learning are you willing to do, and it's like
to move up to that part, like we're almost at the peak now, right?
Yeah. And so like the more learning you're willing to do, the more sort of that, and it's a lifetime of advancing. And then the fourth one is about this they call it this mountain with no top in that diagram. It's because you're in a way you're kind of finding the ways that you are truly unique. And I don't say that in a way of like everybody's a winner type of, everybody gets a participation prize, but like you do have a unique skill if you take the time to develop it. It takes a whole lifetime to actually get to that point.
Right.
But the more skills and the more learning you do, the more you begin to actualize yourself. And so that's sort of
true. And I feel like it's that concept of like, if you're not growing, right, you're like stagnant. So that's why that mountain has no top, because you can keep going if you want to.
Yeah. It's like, it's never ending. It's like, hopefully you're learning throughout your life.
Right. Now, when you talk to your students, like my assumption is always that, when someone in a university is talking to students, they're referring to learning, in a more formal way. But when you talk to them about this, do you mean like a combination of formal and informal? And when I say informal, I kind of mean like it could be through any means, right? Like a work, at your work, you're learning these things, right? Or it could mean you're just trying to figure out something new on your own. That informal means a whole slew of other ways besides actually just like being at a school.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. some years ago, about 8, 9 years ago, I was talking to a med student, and he was saying like, I'm just kind of curious about how I should spend my time in med school. And so I asked him like, what are you really interested in? He said, I'm interested in technology applied to medicine, specifically telemedicine. And of course,
Hmm.
telemedicine is much more ubiquitous now, especially with what's
Yeah.
going on now. But 8 or 9 years ago, it was like a niche. Very few
Yeah.
people knew much about it. And I said, well, think of it this way: if you went into the library and just like read as much as you possibly could about telemedicine in those 2 hours, once you finish reading in those 2 hours, you'll know more about telemedicine than 50% of the faculty here. And then
Wow.
once you, because it's a niche thing, and so if you spend
Right.
2 hours a week for a month, let's say if you did 8 or 10 hours of solid research on it, teaching yourself, you'll know more about telemedicine than 90% of the faculty here. And
Mm,
if you do 4 years worth, let's say your whole time in med school, every week you took some time and taught yourself a few things about it and spend disciplined time, by the end of medical school, you'll be one of the experts in
wow.
telemedicine, and you just have graduated med school. And
Right.
you think about like now, it's like telemedicine then was like, well, that was a thing, but now it's coming, it's here.
Right.
And it's
Oh
kind
yeah.
of like you kind of want to think through like, what is the future thing that I can begin to invest some time now? Um,
Yeah.
this separates it from the normal training you get, because like in med school, they'll
Hmm.
train you a certain set of things, but I say that's what
Sure.
everybody gets. So that's,
Right.
you need to know it, but you don't want to overinvest in generic things. Like you're going to want to take I would say 10 to 20% of that time and invest in a niche thing that you are interested in. And then those two things together create the opportunity.
Yeah, that's really great. I love that you're giving the students these, I mean, because it seems like it's outside of the box probably to so many educators to talk about lifelong learning in this way, but I just love it because I think it opens so many doors to people to realize that, like, I'm a mother of three. I'm like, if I wish that I could go and sit back down at school, but that's just not going to happen. And the fact is that there are so many other ways to learn. It's just we don't necessarily think that that's like a learning opportunity, right? Like that this thing that I'm trying to figure out, or me going and doing research or reading, like, oh, I don't know, but it really truly is.
Yeah, it's like you could read a book. There's so many resources out there. It's like all there are is resources right now. And
Right. Yeah.
one example I was going to give you is I don't know, some years ago I was listening to NPR, and they were saying most of us drive every day, but does all this practice of driving make us better drivers? And it's like,
Right.
no, actually, right, it's bad. And the question is like, because learning needs to be deliberate. You can't commute, and you think you're just because you're doing something for a certain amount of time doesn't mean
Yeah.
you can be. And one example I tend to give in some of the workshops is I ask people like, okay, in 10 years from now, you're going to be like a driver for the CIA. You're going to have to be like awesome, like an expert driver. What are you going to do? You can only invest like 2 or 3 hours a week over 10 years. But what are you going to
Yeah.
do? And everybody come up with these ideas, and it's like, yeah, see, they'll work. Like if you did this thing for 2 or 3 hours a week, like you will, in 10 years, you'll be you'll be like top level driver. And so it doesn't require you to quit your job. It just
Hmm.
requires a little bit of deliberate time set aside to learn.
So when you say deliberate time set aside, like I'm thinking, of course, like, yes, of course, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to focus on this thing. But is there something else that you think helps make that time more deliberate? Like I find if I take notes and I write, like there's something about me reading something, but then also taking notes that like solidifies it. And to me, it's like, I can't just do it once. I need to continue to practice that, like you said. So are there other ways where you could take that time and focus on something, but make it even more meaningful?
Yeah, I think there's like three main modes of learning. Um, And so one of the modes is like you reading and you thinking, and you kind of like are kind of, it's a little bit individual. There's another mode where you could go and kind of talk to, train with somebody who's more of an expert. So somebody who
Okay.
can teach you or mentor you. And so if you're trying to learn something, I
Yeah.
would recommend that you reach out to people who are already good practitioners. They can cut that learning time a bit. And then the
I like
third
that.
the third part is you need to practice. And so it's like, you can't,
Mm-hmm.
let's say if you want to be a really great driver, you can't get there by reading. You can't just read. And so, but you do, but
Right.
reading is useful. And so, but you have to go out
Mm-hmm.
there and start practicing. And
Yeah.
so
The
practice,
doing.
yeah. So those three things, you're gonna want to kind of like mix those three things into kind of, and if you kind of have a good balance of those three things, and you do it deliberately, just, and I'm not saying deliberately means 40% this, it just means like
Sure.
you've
Yeah.
thought
The
about it.
focus is there. Yeah. You're
Yeah,
really like,
you
okay, this
will,
is it.
yeah, you will start learning.
Yeah. That's so nice. So I know you shared with us a couple of stories about some of the students you've chatted with. Is there anything that you think would be like a great takeaway for a person that might be considering, how else do I kind of like beef up myself over my life, beyond obviously the deliberate learning, but like, is there any focus areas that you'd be like, oh, you should be thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting. It's I don't know. Let's just kind of like brainstorm a little bit, because this is
Yeah.
kind of an interesting time. Because a lot, I'll just get a little bit, kind of delve into this idea of skills and value. And I think about, um, almost rather than from a me perspective, it's almost like why skills, and I
Mm-hmm.
sort of view skills as, you need skills in order to provide value to society. And so it's like, and in a way, your skills is the way that you choose to provide value to society.
Mm-hmm.
So don't think about it as a job. Think about it as like, what is it that you're going to contribute? You know, and so then, so but if you look at it that way, there's actually, it opens the doors quite a bit to. There's a lot of different ways you can contribute. It doesn't have to be
Mm-hmm.
through in exactly a career path. I mean, yes, but the more and more, it's like a little bit less about that. And so, in a way, this idea is like, what do you like? It's almost like, what do you like, and how are you going to get better at that? And then once you
Right.
get better at that, who needs that? And
Right.
and so it's, what's kind of interesting now, is that it's like there's all these tools there, and what happens, what I means is like, I was driving home from a family vacation, and I was listening to either a podcast or an audiobook, and it was talking about
Mm-hmm.
this family in Utah, and I was like, I perked up, because I was like, oh, family in Utah, and
Yeah.
the son's name was, it was a father and son combination. The son's name was Lincoln. I was like, oh, that's my son's name is Lincoln.
Oh,
And so I had to think like, oh, the universe is
what are the
trying to tell me
chances? Were we
something.
on a podcast?
Yeah. And so, and so they apparently have this YouTube channel, and this YouTube channel is them cutting things in half and seeing what's inside of things. And they have like 6 million subscribers, which, if you have about 6 million subscribers on YouTube, you're actually,
Pretty good.
you're making a good chunk of change there. And so,
Yeah.
and of course, like, that's not like that's not one of those like career path, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it's not like,
One day I'm thinking that I'm going to cut some
yeah,
stuff in half.
cut some half and put it on YouTube. But it is sort of like, oh, wouldn't this be cool? And it came from that, right? And then, of course, there's
Yeah.
all these skills that, yeah, you need to know how to produce video, and then that suddenly
Sure.
skills, right?
Yep.
That's one example. And then another one is, I teach a course on design thinking, and
Mm.
I was talking to students about the future, and how the future is going to be a lot more humanistic than it has been. I was giving
Mm-hmm.
the example of all these industries, like, let's say, even look at farming. It used to be that it
Sure.
was very manually intensive, and then now it's a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
machines doing stuff.
Right.
But if like something's not quite awesome with machine things, because now you get it's a bit corporate, and so
Hmm.
now you have this organic farming, which is like it's not
Right.
as doesn't yield quote unquote as much, but the quality is quite good. People will actually pay more
Hmm.
for it, and so this is kind
Right.
of like the same type of thing. It's like you almost want to have an organic thing,
Yeah.
because because if you add that human touch to it, it imbues it with value because people want that. When
Hmm.
I was a student came by and said after class and said, "Hey, yeah, I was listening to what you're saying, and what do you think about this? My brother, he is essentially starting his own little business, helping people find like vacation deals online and da da da." And I said, "Oh, you mean like a travel agent?" And I'm like, I said,
But he was like, didn't know what that was.
I'm like 40, almost 48 years old. So I said, um, back when I was a kid, we had travel agents and they helped us book tickets. But now we don't need we don't need anybody to help us book
Right.
tickets, because like Expedia can do that much, much better.
Sure.
We don't need, but what happens is one thing that Expedia can't do is add that human touch. And so, for example, if your brother decided to say, you know what, I'm going to focus myself on a region of the world, let's say Patagonia or something like that, and
Hmm.
I know that area very well, and I can guide people to the right things for that niche.
Yep.
Something that a computer can't do. And
Nope.
so when I
And then
say
you can
like,
create all those guided tour, like the special
yeah,
things and like the experiences, right? I only say this because I used a travel agent to help me book, like when I first took the kids to Disney. It was so overwhelming, the thought of like all the things you had to set up. And she just did it all for me. And it was like a beautiful, and I was like, wow, I would pay for this.
yeah, I know. We used to pay for it, and then it kind of got all the transactions are on their way to be done by robots and computers.
Yeah.
All the
Right.
human touch things are valuable. And so
Hmm.
that's one of those skills. It's sort of like you think like cutting things in half and putting it on YouTube. What economic value is that? It's like not, it has no economic value, but it is interesting to people. And so
Yep.
anything that's kind of like, what do people need? And if you
Yeah.
kind
If
of
it's
think that,
valuable, then, right.
yeah. And so what's valuable, it's funny, but what's valuable isn't what's like, I call it a commodity. Like don't produce commodities, like
Hmm.
produce almost like artistic things,
Yeah.
and the artistic thing is not just art, but it is a practice, a discipline combined with your
Hmm.
perspective. And if you can combine those two things, what you create is pretty unique. And you'll find that people like that human touch. And so that's kind of the future.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what I encourage people to kind of, that's so called diversify and just kind of find that niche.
Yeah. I love the way you're talking about this because that's kind of the way I've been thinking of it lately as well, is just trying to figure out like what it is that if I don't mentor students, but I do, for whatever reason, people like to come to me to help them find jobs a lot. And I'm always like, what do you want in your life? And they're like, I'm looking for a job.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no,
It's
no,
like,
no, no, no. So it's like, let's have like a visualization exercise. Let's picture your life if you had all the things you wanted, and let's work back from there.
I know it's like everything like once like what's always like I always go back to like dating when it comes to an
Yeah.
analogy, and then so it's sort of like people's like, I just want to find a spouse, and I go like, great, but who's going to want to marry you? And so it's like, why would somebody want to marry you? And
Yeah.
you're going to have to think less about I need a spouse and more about how do I make myself attractive so that people will, and so this is again kind of the value producing mindset. It's like, how do I
Hmm.
make myself better? And then once I make myself better, then I can get, the spouse, the job, and all of those things.
Right, right. No, I get what you're saying. Well, I really appreciate all these thoughts. I know we're wrapping up here, but is there anything else in particular that you'd like to share about some of the stuff that we've talked about today?
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast. I was like, I listen to more podcasts now, and they're talking about generations, and they're
Hmm.
talking about millennials. And in a way, it's been kind of hard for millennials because, I don't know, there's a feeling, there's a sense, and I totally get it. I'm a Gen Xer, um, and but in a way, it's like there's a lot of things that were sort of promised of millennials that it didn't kind of pan out.
Yeah.
Um, and I would just say the world needs millennials to create new things now. Like I would encourage people, like if you're younger, I would really recommend that you just think like, go create something new, go create
Yeah.
something, and don't wait for the system to kind of show you, because the system itself is changing so much. Like we're never going to go
Hmm.
back to what things were like 6 months ago. And
No.
so who's going to create the future? And it is going to be sort of the younger people. And so it's terrifying from a point of view of, oh, how do I do that? It's like, yeah, it's hard. But if you kind of put yourself in the perspective of like, I'm going to figure out a way to provide value in some way that I really like doing, you're going to find that it leads to sort of this top of this mountain. It will lead you to
Yeah.
create. It leads you to create something, and it will be of a great value to society. So I just wanted to kind of give that message to people.
Yeah, I love that. In the article that I read, your article, I remember the one part where at the beginning you talked a lot about the problem solving. Like if you are problem solving, if because right now, right, there's so many new problems too, right? But
Yeah.
if you continue to figure out like how to solve a problem, like that's you creating something new. And sometimes it doesn't seem so hard when you really see that there's an issue and you're like, oh, maybe I can think of a new way to tackle that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like there's always ways, and just if you're always learning and making yourself better and solving problems, you're going to be fine.
I agree. Well, thank you so much, Tony, for joining today. And thank you all for listening to Let's Talk About Skills, baby. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, share with your friends. Would love to get a rating or review from you. Of course, if you'd like to follow me, Kelly Bailey, you can follow me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram at Kelly R. Bailey. I'd love to hear any feedback or suggestions you might have and would really appreciate your support. Well, thank you all and hope you have a great day.